I just poured bourbon into the glass right in front of the microphone.
I heard it. It's going to be that kind of call.
Here we go.
Welcome to Film Riot. I'm Ryan Conley, and today on the show we have Lucas Harger, which if you listen to this podcast or if you watch our show Film Riot, you already know who Lucas is. He is my editor, one of my closest, if not my closest collaborator. He edited There Comes a Knocking and BALLiSTIC, but he's just an incredibly talented editor and a great storyteller. He's worked on everything from narrative to documentary, and most recently, he worked on one of the launch series for Quibi, which, as of listening to this podcast, is out now, and you can jump over, get Quibi, get a 90-day free trial, and check out Prodigy and everything else they have there. I've been flicking through it. Quibi has nothing to do with this episode. I don't know anybody over there, but it's pretty amazing so far. And I'm very interested in this new medium of storytelling. It's very unique. So I'm very curious to see what happens going forward. And that's really why I wanted to talk to Lucas today. I wanted to talk to him about what that process was like. Was it any different than making anything else? What sort of things needed to be delivered? And of course, we talk about storytelling in general. He had a lot of interesting things to say as usual. So I'm going to stop with the intro and jump right into it with Lucas. So we've had you on before to talk about different things, but you now have a Quibi show coming out that you've been working on, and I thought it'd be great to pick your brain about that, just because, I mean, as of recording, Quibi has not launched yet.
Yep.
I'm super interested about this platform, so I really wanted to hear from you what that process was like working on a show like that.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, no, and it was something that was... because the platform is different and because the platform is new, I think there's a lot of things. It was super interesting because I've told, people I work on the show with, other editors, that this is going to be a unique experience for us going forward, just because it's a new delivery platform. It's a new delivery method. It's a new streaming service. I mean, we're likely not to ever work on something in our careers again where all of those three things coalesce. You know what I mean? Like, everything is new.
I can't really tell from the advertisements, but is the main idea to watch the show like upright, like 9:16?
I mean, so there is the two deliverables that we have to send, the vertical and the horizontal. They're not saying one way is this is the way that you should watch it. It is totally left up to the viewer from my experience and interactions, and the vertical and the horizontal elements give the viewer the ability to like engage with the media however they see fit and however they want. And they really push that both the vertical version and the horizontal version be the best versions. You know what I mean? You don't want to say like, oh, please watch it horizontally, please watch it vertically, please watch it like this or that. Like, they should stand on their own, whether it's vertical or horizontal.
Wait, so that's two totally different like experiences, totally different ratios. So does that mean you're essentially making two episodes because one has to work in the one landscape and the other has to work in the other?
I mean, there are, for our show, which is a documentary series, it's not really like two shows. It's taking into account the dual deliverable on production to account for that. And the way that our show specifically shot was like in the field with the talent and following them around. It was responsive. We were like not setting up a ton of shots and not really doing any of that stuff that would be more common in narrative. And so it's being very cognizant on set for that. And then we take those, we cut horizontal, we would cut our timeline just like you'd cut any timeline. And then pretty early in the process, we'd start thinking about and wrapping our heads around how do we make this sing in the vertical version as well. There's other content that will be on the platform that takes advantage of the vertical and horizontal and unique approaches. And I think those other more creative approaches, not more creative, but their content is more conducive to using the vertical and horizontal ratios in interesting and unique ways. I think there is more that goes into producing and posting those, and it does become more of a almost like a two show type thing. But ours is really just two delivery methods for a singular idea film. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So does that mean when I'm watching horizontally, I'm watching what you initially cut in your timeline, and when I slip it vertically, does it switch to a different shot, or does it become almost like pan and scan?
So we did panning and scanning, but we also did split screens. And so sometimes we would have other shots, different shots, alternate shots, or stacked like split screens. You know what I mean?
That is so interesting because that could be two totally different experiences. Like you could watch the thing twice.
Yeah, for sure.
And have a totally different experience.
Yeah, you could. Oh yeah, and it would be a different experience. And I think that is something that is to be leaned into, that they are a different experience, and you don't lean into one experience is better than the other. Ideally, both experiences are powerful in and of themselves. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I really like that. And I'm not one of the people that bemoans new technology or, oh, you're going to watch it on your phone. I'm like, you know, a film that's made, which this is derailing a little bit of what we're talking about, but I think you have to separate the two things. Like a film that is made to be experienced on the big screen, like take, you know, the Avengers movies like Endgame and Infinity War. Those were made by the creators to be watched in that way. Big screen, massive speakers, home theater, biggest TV you possibly can if you haven't seen it in the theater. You know, it's not made to be watched on your phone. So when people tell me they watch movies like that on their phone, I cringe a little. I'm like, why would you do that? Because that's just not what it was made for.
Yeah.
But when you have a new technology or a new form of entertainment that's specifically geared towards and made for the mobile platform, then I am very interested.
Totally.
And would even love to make something for it, especially because what you're talking about, that is so unique. That idea of there are two experiences to be had by this exact same video, depending on where you're flipping your phone, and you could see like how many places they could take that. It's pretty amazing.
Yeah, no, it is. It's awesome. And I mean, it's a redefined sandbox to play within, right? And you have to approach it like that. You can't, and it's all new. It's original content, right? They're not retrofitting. They're not like, you know, Netflix has, HBO has their original content, but they also have their acquired content. Like there's not acquired content on Quibi. It's all originally produced content for their specific sandbox, for their specific platform.
Oh, wow.
And so
I didn't know that.
And so and I could be lying. I mean, I don't think they're acquiring content. They're not acquiring content.
It went from
now
like
that you said that,
super confident to, well,
I am very confident that they are not going out and buying. I mean, this is an irrelevant point because Disney and Marvel, but they're not going out and acquiring Marvel movies and retrofitting them for Quibi. Right. You know what I mean? There will be quote unquote, you know, feature length films broken up into these 10-minute chapters, but it's original content. And so they're leaning into their own service. You know what I mean? They're leaning into their own delivery method and in encouraging, like, make content that is for this platform.
Well, I was lucky enough, you sent me the show that you worked on, and I was lucky enough to check it out. I watched all of them and loved it. And I would like to talk just a little bit about the show because it is a show, it's sports related, but you really lean into the human story. And that, because I'm not a huge fan of sports. I do like watching stuff about sports, not the games themselves. But what really connected with me on that and what I really appreciated was how much you guys really leaned into that very relatable human connection. Could you talk a little bit about that? Like how it was shot and how you found those very personal through lines in each of those episodes?
Yeah, totally. I mean, that's a large conversation, and I'm super thrilled that kind of connected with you in that way. I mean, we approached it as this kind of Chef's Table effect, right? It's like I was never really into food, but I'd watch an episode of Chef's Table, and like by the end of it, I would remark on how I can see the relationship between the chef and their father playing out in their dishes. And I was like, what the hell? Like, this is not what that's not who I am. So I'm glad that it connected with you on the personal level, because that was the intention from the beginning. And so from the beginning, it's really Rand and Janina at Park Stories. That's their production company, and this is their show, and they pitch, and there's the whole process of pitching and selling the show that in and of itself is a remarkable and an amazing feat. But beyond that, it's their attention to detail and their attention to the human story and to the human element that really was the tip of the spear for the whole project, right? So they are super into sports, and I'm not into sports really at all. I love hockey, but that's kind of it. And so, but they know sports, and they know the landscape of sports content, and they know this approach, going after the human element, connects people to these individuals in such a significant and remarkable way that allows people who are sports adjacent or sports interested or sport, to really fall in love with these characters and really fall in love with these people. And so it starts in pre-production, and then it goes into production and actually living with these athletes and capturing these moments with them and interviewing them in such an incredible way. Rand is one of the best, if not the best, interviewer I've cut. And so he is able to like really dial in and drill down into each of the characters, but also then in each of these people in their lives that kind of play a part in building and making them who they are. And so there's a lot of really fertile seed there. Once I get the footage, there's a ton of emotion and tension and thoughtfulness in the footage just because of the trust that they've established with the subject on production. And then it comes to my desk and it's about polishing and wrapping it up and really uncovering the emotional heartbeat of the piece. And so it's something that we are in constant conversation with. In pre-production, we're talking about these stories and who these people are and picking out. And then Luke Corver is the director and co-director and DP. And so he is in charge of like the visuals and really pulling out everything. It's a very small crew. It's like a 4-person crew on production. So everybody's wearing a million different hats on production and they're gathering all of the seeds that like bloom into what the episodes end up being. And so we're in constant contact from pre-production into production. And then I get the footage and hopefully the seeds grow.
Do you know how long production was for this, for each individual episode? How long they were with those characters?
So I believe it all together was like 52 days of production. I believe 51, okay. 52. And there's 8 episodes. And so, that's split up. I mean, it's a range, but I'd say 4 to 5, 3 to 5, somewhere in that world. It is really difficult. And this is all Rand crushed it, but it's really difficult to capture, to get in with these, to identify the athletes and to get the time with the athletes because they are world-class athletes. Like even though they're younger, under 21 years old, in a lot of sports, that is pro. You know what I mean?
Right.
And so anyway, that's like an aside, but the time that they spent with them was fully realized and utilized from sun up to sundown with interviews and Verde and B-roll and the whole 9 yards. I would get like maybe 20-ish hours of footage per episode.
Wow.
So over this whole series was like around 160 hours, 150 hours of footage.
Oh my God. And the episodes are like 5 to 9 minutes long.
Yeah, that's the range of ours. And so Quibi is crazy. Under 10 minutes, but ours is like, I think our shortest one is like 5:45 and our, longest one is up around 9:45. So yep. It's like 70 minutes of content, basically.
So then was there a good idea with each athlete what that emotional through line was, or were they all found or some found just during production?
Yeah, I mean, Rand's process, once he identified an athlete and, got a commitment from them to be a part of the show, he would go through and just create these massive guidance docs and just pull everything he possibly could that's out there about them so that we knew we had this starting point. Now, some of them there was a lot and some of them there was nothing. And so as far as walking onto set, having pre-existing knowledge of who they are and finding the emotional through line, sometimes we could be like, this might be interesting. Let's go down this path. And then sometimes it's like, I don't know. And then they would call after, interview 1 and be like, hey, the dad said this, and this. And it'd be like, okay, I think this is interesting. Go down this path. Let's get this footage that supports this. Let's try and set up some scenes and scenarios in this light. And then they call after the other interview. Hey, this was brought, blah, 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 blah. And so we kind of build it on the fly in many ways. And so there was a ton of dialogue and collaboration with some of the episodes. Some of the episodes, it was kind of, we're in there, they shoot, and I get the footage, and we had a chance to talk about it before. But it was kind of fluid. Every athlete was different because we had different info before production, and sometimes they knew not exactly, you never know exactly in documentary work, but they had a good idea of what path to head down. And then sometimes they were just going in completely blind. And it's remarkable. Both ways is a challenge in doc world, but what they pulled out is incredible.
Yeah, man. And it worked, all of them hit really well emotionally, but there was a couple in there that I'm not afraid to say, I got some tears. There were some tears that happened.
Right.
Yeah.
Good.
With the boxing one. Oh man, that got me. That one got me.
Yeah.
But I'm really curious about with this moving away from, the emotional impact back into the technical. I'm curious about the process for this new platform, of what that post process was like. How much different for you and the team over there was it versus, just the typical 16:9 or whatever it is sort of project?
So there's two ends there. Like the first angle you can take that would be literally just the sheer technical approach from A, handling that amount of footage, B, cutting the episodes in horizontal and vertical. The process was more seamless than, we created our workflow on our end to be pretty seamless of going back and forth and trying to dial in these vertical versions. There were some hiccups and some snags, especially early on, just trying to work through the process. How are we going to do this? But once we kind of got rolling, it was pretty simple in that, it was about pulling in another editor at a certain point and having them start to go through and take ownership of the vertical cut, getting the first one down, and then making sure that there are change logs for if the horizontal cut starts to change at all, those changes get filtered through to the vertical one. So you have that. Then the other aspect is just the amount of, we did those 8 episodes. We basically started in, I want to say like September-ish, October, and cut 8 episodes between then and January. And so it was like an absolute blitz of cutting these episodes and having the rounds of review internally and then going rounds of review externally with our creative executives and working on the episodes. And so if you imagine like those 52 days of production happened within August-ish to end of December, and in November, December, you're in no man's land for content just because of Thanksgiving, and then you're into the holiday season. And so 52 days basically in 3 working months is a ton of shooting. And then on top of that, there are just tens and tens and tens of terabytes rolling in. I think we had like 70 terabytes. And so it was about wrangling all of the footage and creating the elements and creating the episodes within a super short time frame. For all intents and purposes, it's a feature length that we cut, colored, audio, and delivered and shipped within 4 months, which is kind of insane in documentary to have raw footage on the desk to completed episodes within like 3 to 4 months.
That is pretty. What about like, was there just like a ridiculous amount of different deliveries you had to do versus what you would normally do?
Yeah, there was, there's, just because it was broken up into 8 different episodes, right? And so you have 8 deliverables, and then you branch out from that. And so you have a vertical and a horizontal. So now you're working with 16 files, and then you always deliver texted and textless. And so now you take those 16s and you multiply it by 4 because you have vertical textless and vertical texted. And so as like the tree, like once it starts to split, you're dealing with 64 to 128 to massive amounts of deliverables, to the point where like when we're going through QC, we're working with, around 100 files to make sure pass QC and all of that. And so it was the process of like wrangling all that and figuring out these different deliverables and what each one needs, and then making sure each deliverable has its time and attention to make sure that it's perfect after you've gone through that process for creative, right? Narrative and creative. And so, yeah, man, it was a good amount, but the team crushed it. You know what I mean? Like having a team in post that can actually handle A, that amount of footage, B, that level of narrative, especially in the sports world. Like we didn't have anything that we could point to and be like, we're making something like this. We were trying to make something that felt wholly original and wholly unique for these athletes because they deserved it, but then also for the platform because the platform deserves it, And so we really poured in as much as we possibly could of like our emotional energy, our technical energy, and our physical energy just to like make these episodes as good as they possibly can be.
Yeah, man, that's such an interesting and crazy process. And I'm definitely looking forward to see not only how this plays out, because I watched this, like traditionally, I watched it on my television. I'm really interested to watch this again. And, with the new experience of, flipping it, watching it vertically versus horizontally. Totally. When is Quibi launch? It's like April
6th.
April 6th.
So our show comes out on launch as well. So we're part of a launch slate. And so our show rolls out every day, once a day. So starting April 6th.
Yeah. And like every show's a little different, right? Like not everything's every day, is it? Some stuff is like
No.
once a week or...
Yeah, they're going to have new shows on the platform every day, but specific shows will have different release cadences based on the DNA of the show or the creative approach of the show. And so not every show is every day, but there will be new shows every day.
Is it 10 minutes and under? Is that like the thing?
Yep.
They don't
That's
cross
the
the
thing.
10-minute line?
Correct. Yep. That is like the thing. Quibi wide is 10 minutes or under. I want to say that there's like a 4-minute minimum, but I don't know. So it's definitely not exceeding 10 minutes. And yeah, that's
I wonder
it.
if that'll ever change. And I wonder if
I don't know, man.
they'll ever go to like Apple TV or something like that so you can actually watch it on. Because I imagine like you could AirPlay it to your television, which is likely how I would watch most things on Quibi, which is funny. But
I mean, can you?
wait, can you not?
Well, that's an app specific thing. Like the app developer would have to enable that.
Well, no, you can AirPlay
I guess
your
you could
actual
mirror.
phone. Yeah,
You could mirror your phone's screen. Yeah, I guess you can. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
I'll allow it.
I'm not saying I definitely will. I'm just
Go
saying I
ahead.
probably will.
I'll allow it.
Thank you, Lucas. I appreciate it.
I got a text from Katzenberg and he allows it.
Oh, great. Tell him I said hi. We haven't seen each
I
other
will
in
not.
so long. Please. Well, what are you working on now? Now that are you guys wrapped with the Quibi show? You're like, good, it's delivered, you're done?
Yep, we delivered it last week. We got through our final round of QC. It's on to a couple other docs, some commercial spots. Our post house is kind of, back in a little bit of the shorter form cadence at the moment, which is fun to kind of transition between longer form and short form. And so we're kind of back into the ad world. I start up another doc here shortly. Yeah, that's kind of where it is. And so, I mean, I'm just like super interested and excited to see how this goes. This has kind of consumed my life for the better part of 6 months. We had, kind of posting 8 episodes. I personally cut like 5 of them. And then there were 3 episodes or a couple episodes here that Sam Biomonte cut, and then and then we had some editorial help from Chent, and then we had Steinbrink, and then some editorial help from Lexi Highland. And so the whole team was around this project, right? And so it's been good to get it out, and now we're just super excited to see it out in the world.
And how much different, like, because you're just coming off the backs of this new platform that you, like you said, you've done for 6 months now. How much different is that? Because it is a doc. They're just really short, different ones. How much different was this versus, a normal doc as far as how you approached, actually crafting the story, or was it pretty much the same?
Yeah, it was pretty different. I mean, so I cut most of like 5 of the episodes, but then I also have a writing credit on basically the entire series. And so narratively, I was in every single episode in it and making sure it all was tracking and in the same universe. So my approach to the series had to be different. And at first it was interesting because, I've done under 10-minute content before. I've done 4 to 10-minute content before, but to have the mandate where an episode could not exceed 10 minutes was interesting. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so you have to approach each episode as that, like, this cannot exceed 10 minutes. And that mental headspace was interesting. And so in a doc, I don't want to say normal because they're not differentiated. They exist simultaneously. And so in another doc sandbox, I would take my time with transitions. I would take my time with these emotional arcs and transitioning between beat A, beat B, beat C, and D. And I would allow it to kind of float and to kind of meander to that. But with the Quibi doc, I really had to exercise an economy of time, and we didn't have time to white glove into soft hand the viewer between these two movements. We had to go. Right now, we have to go. And so that's also started to become built into the DNA of the show, where there's these really quick transitions between this emotion and this emotion. You have hype and then you have tears. And then you're laughing and you have hype and tears. And now you're laughing and now it's done. And so it was this process of taking these emotions, putting them really close into proximity with the other emotion, and then being okay with the viewer wanting more, and being okay with the viewer being like, but wait, that's it? I kind of want more with them.
Yeah.
And the interesting part about this series from a sports content standpoint is there's really not much like it out there, because so much sports content is looking back. You know what I mean? We're reflecting on this basketball team. We're looking back at Michael Jordan's career. We're looking back at this boxing match. We're looking back. Everything is looking back. But with Prodigy and like with these athletes, their careers are happening right now. You know, we have the number 1 ranked basketball player in the country. We have the fastest swimmer in the history of women's swimming. All of these athletes are like here and now, and their careers are happening. And so once you lean in and you say, oh, but wait, that's it, you can go follow them on Instagram. You can go follow them on Twitter, and you can actually take part in their career. And that is something that's pretty unique narratively, and you can use as a narrative tool for this series. Is like, once the viewer says, but that's it, it's like, no, it's not it. There's like a ton more. You just go follow them because their careers are happening.
Yeah, that's something that I thought was super unique is, you know, I'm not like a massive sports fan or anything, but I do enjoy sports docs and sports films. And that's something that struck me, is that it's like, this is a current thing that's going on. Like, this is the start of their career, not the end of it's not highlighting all the things that they've done. It's showing what they've become so far with a glimpse of what they might be.
Absolutely, man.
And I thought that was really unique and pretty special for this sort of thing.
Yeah, totally. So now you can so you watch Sha'Carri Richardson's episode, and you're invested in Sha'Carri, and she's going to be in the Olympics, and you're going to turn on the TV, and you're going to see her there on the starting line of the 100-meter, and you're so invested in her because you feel like you know her. You know, you've seen what she's dealt with, you've seen what she's overcome to get to the position and the point that she is, and you're invested. Like, it's happening now. And so it's really, honestly, it's like the start of a conversation between the viewer and the athlete, because you can engage with them. And you had to take in, like, we took that into account in pre-production, production. I mean, it's the whole concept of the series, Prodigy, like the next batch of world-class athlete. We just leaned into that in post and in the storytelling. And if there was a stone that wasn't, like, some stones can be unturned here, because there's some stones that are like still developing because they're young. They're 18, 19, 20, 21. Like, we have the ability not to turn every stone over, because you can engage with them and you can like be an active participant in their narrative as an athlete.
Yeah. And I think that is, which is what you're saying, is just going to benefit, you know, anybody watching the stuff that they're going to do going forward, or just their careers going forward. Because now I feel kind of attached to them already. So anything totally, like you said, that they're in, I'm going to be, you know, rooting that on.
Absolutely. Yeah, totally, man.
With a piece like this, let's just say very specifically these pieces, which, I mean, this isn't out yet. It might be out when we release this episode, actually. So then people can actually see it, which I don't think we've said it yet, but it's Prodigy on Quibi. Yep. So if you haven't seen it, go watch it so you can know more of what we're talking about. Plus, it's just great. So go watch it. But each of these pieces are such well-crafted stories, and, you know, very, you know, specifically, like I said before, one that really connected with me was the one about the boxer. Mm-hmm. And it just felt like this full narrative in just 9 minutes. Is there something that you're thinking about when you're specifically crafting that, or in the middle of crafting it, when you're starting to see that story more, that maybe relates to when you're working on something that's more narrative, maybe a way that you're mapping it physically on, you know, your board, or you're creating an act structure of some kind? Or is there a roadmap emotionally that you guys are thinking about, that you want to hit this note, then this note? You know, is there any correlation there with the narrative versus this?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely correlation. For me personally, I bring a documentary approach to, I like to think I bring a documentary approach to narrative, where I like to lean into a little bit more of the why rather than like just the how.
Let me ask you to dive into that a little bit, because I'm actually interested in what you said. The way you approach documentary, you bring into your narrative work?
I mean, cutting a documentary is so much more difficult and all-consuming than cutting a narrative.
Oh, for sure.
I mean, I like to think that narrative cutting is building up, like you're building a structure, whereas documentary, you're reducing to a structure. So it's like Michelangelo's, you know, I didn't carve David, I discovered David in a block of marble. Right. You know what I mean? Like, yeah. I'm taking away everything that is not David to arrive at what is David. And that is what once you have 160 hours of footage in your lap and you're like, now make something, you have to take the position and you take the role of the writer, the director, the editor, in some disconnected way, the DP, because you're selecting shots. And I mean, you're selecting shots anyway in narrative, but in documentary, so much of it is just reactive on set. And so you're picking the moments. And so it is so much more difficult to, in my opinion, so much more difficult to craft and cut a documentary than a narrative, that I bring a lot of the attributes, and I bring a lot of the approach, and I bring a lot of the tool bag that I've developed in the documentary world into the narrative world. And that helps me wrangle media, cut, have conversations with directors, build that narrative rapport to where we can break stories. And honestly, I think that's like part of our relationship, because you call me and ask me to like just converse about story ideas that you have.
Yeah.
Right. Mm-hmm. And that is something that that is a conversation that I'm allowed to have, not because I've written anything, but because I've cut documentary.
Yeah, totally.
In my opinion.
And I see, specifically, I don't know any other editor relationship. I've never had one. You're the only editor I've ever worked with.
Say it again.
The last. Say it again. First and last, baby. But the like just connection on story and creatively, how we see everything connected so well, that I just see the director-editor relationship as closely as when I'm working with a writer or with a DP, sometimes even and more so, because it is just the fundamental structure of the thing you're trying to tell, which kind of shapes everything. So I just think, from square one, telling you read all my pitches, you read all, right, even my just general concepts. If I have a new idea, it. Just having that feedback from you has been invaluable and a much better process for me. It's not the island that it used to be. Because you're going to be there in the end to help shape the final thing. So it just makes sense that collaboration would exist from the beginning to me. And I don't know if other people operate that way. Do you? I'm not sure.
No, I'm not sure. I think part of no, I don't know. And also I don't think so. But I think one of the things that makes that work between a director and an editor is that though we are unified in narrative, we are still in different disciplines. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like I can send cuts to people outside of my discipline a lot in a different mindset than I can send a cut to an editor, because it's like we're not doing the same thing. We're not attempting to create the same thing. We're not, you know what I mean? And so I think like because we occupy different parts of the same universe, that it makes that conversation and connection actually work. But I think, and I mean, I should be so bold to say, like, I think I provide some, if nothing more than a sounding board, help, or at least some consolation to you as you're breaking your stories and developing your ideas. But that muscle for me was only exercised by cutting doc. Because I haven't written anything, and I haven't directed anything, and I haven't done any of that work. But the work that I have done is like a shitload of documentary work. You know what I mean? And so that narrative muscle can be exercised in a different way. So I like to think that slightly different exercising can be a benefit in the narrative world. Conversely, may not work as seamlessly or as effectively, but so that is what I mean when I say my documentary work informs my narrative, and I'm not so sure my narrative work informs my doc work.
It makes a lot of sense to me, though, because doc work is so much about finding the true, honest human story that's real. It's not, it's not written. It's not fabricated. It's the actual existing human story, and finding that
for sure,
and just massaging it into the massaging. I don't know why I used that word.
Massage.
But pulling it to the forefront of the thing that you're making. And, whereas film, you're crafting it. You're inventing the human story.
Yeah.
But that's like paramount to any piece is the human story. It's like, there comes a knocking it's a written script that's out into studios' hands now and all that. So it's not something I'm working on right now. But while I was working on it, my thought process was very much, this is a drama about these two individuals
Totally.
That's also scary. Not this is
Correct.
a horror movie. It was a movie about two people and what they were going through, the human story, and then it happened to have scary stuff in it. That's kind of how I thought about it, and how I'm thinking about all my pitches, because short films are different for me.
Yeah.
My short films aren't so much that way. My short films will have a little bit of that in it for a few of them, but mostly somewhat spectacle, somewhat, a moment plucked out. But that's what I think short films are great for. And that's how I personally like to make short films, something that's entertaining, something that makes you want more. So hopefully a producer will see it and be like, hey, what is this? Which, that theory has worked out in my favor. But with a feature, especially when I'm watching film, like I just watched The Way Back, and I really appreciated the fact that much like your series on Quibi, it had to do with basketball, but it really wasn't about that at all. It was all about Ben Affleck's character and, the human aspect of that, the trials that he was going through.
Totally.
And, the basketball was a total backseat to that. And that's what really drives it. So it makes a lot of sense that narrative would really refine that for you and kind of, let you see that very clearly.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, honestly, I'm not a sports fan, but these stories are so rich, right? That it makes me become a sports fan. I mean, because especially with Prodigy, well, you have everything you're ever looking for in a narrative. You have tension, you have struggle, you have overcoming, you have a point in life that these athletes are like struggling with. You know what I mean? Like they can make it, they cannot make it. Like we'll see. You know what I mean? It's a story of becoming. And so there are so many things you're looking for in doc work and narrative that are present in athletes' life already. You know what I mean? Coming from the ashes, coming from nothing, excelling at something, and having the means to pull your family out of what you've been struggling. You know what I mean? So there's like so many, like there's so much narrative gold built into sports stories that I think that's part of the reason why our culture really rallies around A, sports, and then B, sports stories.
Yeah, totally. And I think that's one of the reasons that it's hard for me to actually get into sports, because for me, it's just spectacle. I don't know the stories behind the players or the teams. So to me, it's just a dude throwing a ball to another dude and then they tackle each other. And I'm just like, I just don't care.
Yeah.
But once you have something like what you've put together and you, like you said, you see that struggle, that human story. Now I'm like, I never cared about snowboarding, but now I want to see this kid snowboard and I want to root for him.
Yeah. You know him, you know his family, you know what he's like, what they're going through. Yeah, absolutely, man.
I think that's like a big takeaway and lesson. And, something that focuses me on that even more is again, how important the human element is, like the character is paramount to everything. If the human story and the character doesn't land, I mean, look at like The Voice and American Idol.
Yeah, man.
They figured that out and they have locked into that.
Totally.
Like, tell the story behind the person, show the struggle, and now people are locked and they want to watch this journey that this person's going to go on. Whereas without that, it's just a person who sings, and it's the empathy of it, finding the empathy and the connection, and then you're locked, that's how I see horror too. Like, I'm not going to be scared if I don't care about this person. I got to understand their struggle. I got to connect with them and relate to them. And now I'll be scared.
You have to know what they're going to lose or what they have the potential to lose.
Yes.
You know what I mean? You have to know that what you're watching them do, like what they're doing right now, there is something at stake, which is the narrative heartbeat of everything. Like there is something at stake here, and this is what's at stake. And so if you can establish what's at stake for these individuals, if you can establish what's at stake for them as characters, but then also them as human beings, like it doesn't matter if they're curling, no offense to curlers, but like it doesn't matter if they're doing something, playing carpet ball or pickle. Like it doesn't matter if they're doing something that nobody really cares about, but if you know that this means something to their their livelihood, B, their emotional state, like who they are as people, like as soon as something is at stake, everything clicks in. Like that's why Rudy is amazing, right? Like there's something at stake with this game that he's playing. That's why any film period, I think, works, is because we've set up what's at stake and there's a payoff. And so you're totally right. I mean, and that's why Chef's Table works so well and works so well for me, is because they show what's at stake with these chefs, and then they show the manifestation of how they're dealing with what's at stake. by how they're cooking and how they're making their dishes and how they're presenting them and how the artistic approach to the dishes is influenced by what they've gone through and what has been at stake. And so if you can establish that in any character doing anything, like the setting becomes irrelevant when the character is paramount. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think watching stuff like that, documentaries or anything that dives into reality of, that human condition, whatever that person's going through, I think that's really invaluable for those of us who do write narrative. I do get a lot of my inspiration from that. Like often, like a certain thing I'm currently working on, I've just cracked who the character is that the story is about, which is always one of the hardest things. Because for me, it's like, who is this story about? Like I have the concept.
Totally.
But who is this about? And until I have the who is this about, there's nothing I can do with this concept.
For sure. But when you're saying who is this about, in some ways, and I know this is like esoteric and, we could be whatever, but once you discover, and I've seen this happen with you, like once you discover who this is about, that character takes on a life of their own and it doesn't feel like you created them as much as you discovered them.
Yes.
You're just holding on for dear life and you're trying to keep up with this character that you didn't create, but you discovered.
Yeah. And then you find roadblocks where it's like, you're following them down this path and well, obviously this happens. And then obviously this happens. And then, the things just keep coming to you is like, like the characters telling you, like people say, which sounds a bit pretentious, but I mean, I don't know how else to put it. That's kind of how it feels. And then at some point you get stuck and then it's, well, now what? And then you're thinking about it and then all of a sudden it reveals itself again and then it just goes again. So there'll be times where it slows down for a second as you're trying to learn something about the character that you can't quite place. Well, why this? Like I know that I can feel it that this is the thing that's happening, but why? And then that reveals itself and then on it goes. But often I'll also research if it's not something very like There Comes a Knocking was very specifically about personal experiences, although, taken to, an extreme, but they're about like different personal experiences about things I've experienced myself, seen other experience. So there wasn't a ton of research into character because it is kind of me. That's all up in there. But there are other films that I'm currently working on where the experience of the character is not my experience, but I can empathize with it and I have seen other. So then it's about finding a doc or something that talks to that. And so that's something that I've been doing recently is looking for real people, real interviews to really empathize with that scenario or that person. And that has really helped open up the story to me. But the further I get along and the more I'm, crafting these stories, the more the human story takes such a front burner position to everything else and nothing else matters until that's locked in. And then the rest goes. It's funny. I don't remember who I told, but it feels like an alternate universe because online, because of how I make short films, the opposite is said. You need more character. But with my films, the notes I get is I need more spectacle. So it's really funny that the short and the features are exact opposites. Yeah. So I'm just like, I just need to find the middle ground, I guess.
Yeah. No, I suppose. I've read your scripts. I don't know if they need more spectacle. I think the feature sandbox, the feature playground is exactly what your sensibilities and approaches are built for. You know what I mean? Not saying that the short films are not great in and of themselves, but you've said it yourself, like your short films are a means to an end, and the end is the feature. And when you read the feature scripts and when you see the feature concepts, it becomes very apparent and very obvious that is the end. Not saying that is all, because there's also the series ideas and all of that. But the longer form play is where your sensibilities are most perfectly built for.
That's great to hear because that's what I want to do is the features. But I've always felt that way. Like it's always been difficult for me to keep them short.
Yeah.
What BALLiSTIC was a 20-page script, or something like that at first, and then I cut it down finally to 18 or 19 pages, and then we eventually edited it down to 15 minutes.
Yep.
So yeah, keeping it short has always been more difficult because you want to live with the moment. You want to live with the characters. And
you want to build that human connection, which is exactly what you're talking about. And you don't feel like you can't. Yeah, totally, dude.
There's definitely some filmmakers that do it. Like within such a short amount of time, they do all of the things. But that's just I'm not as good at that as those filmmakers where they can distill it down to such a short period of time. For me, I need to like to live in that world for a period of time, let it like stew over time, let you come to conclusions, just from the constant consuming of films and thinking toward the features. Maybe that's why, but it's always been harder for me to distill so much into so little. So when I see some filmmakers just knock it out of the park, tell this incredible emotional story in under 10 minutes, I'm like, you son of a bitch.
Yeah, totally. It was definitely a challenge to make you feel it was a challenge with the runtime to make you feel connected with the characters as much as like you did, and as much as other people who have seen the episodes do and have and feel this connection towards the characters. The interesting thing is like to hear which episodes are which people's favorites. You know what I mean? Because everybody has a different favorite episode, which is super interesting. And it's more telling of the emotional state of the viewer than it is of the episode. You know what I mean? Everybody has a different favorite episode in a different order of their top 3, their top 5, and like order them by 8. And so everyone brings their baggage to the viewing. Everyone brings their upbringing, their emotional state to what they're watching. And that was something else that we really leaned into, is like, this episode is going to hit really hard for dads. This episode is going to hit really hard for this other group of people. You know what I mean? And like leaning into those unique characteristics and not crafting it in a way that is using like this should be for this, but we need to force it into this. Like allowing the subject and allowing the story to inform us, and then being like, okay, we can go there. You know what I mean? Like we can follow you. And I love pretension, but it's like, I never fear following the character. You know what I mean? Right. And you have to be willing to follow the character. And if you've never been in the seat of being led by the character and feeling like you're holding on for dear life to like where this thing is going, like you'll think this sounds stupid and ignorant. But as soon as you're in that seat where you're just like, I'm just trying to keep up, you understand like the character takes the forefront and you're just following the character. And I look back on all these episodes and I watch them all, and I still feel the emotion that I felt when I was watching all of the interview. I was watching all of the footage, you know what I mean? But then I see this finished episode and I feel like I didn't even do anything. You know what I mean? I feel like, yeah, this is what this always should have been. And this is what this always was. I just had to like uncover it and, dust it off and present it in the most succinct way that it could possibly be presented. It feels like this thing had always existed because in a very real and significant way, it always had existed because it's documentary. These people are real, and this is real shit that they went through. You know what I mean? And then it's just like, how do we repackage that to present it in under 10 minutes to an audience that is watching this and feeling this and emoting with it? And so you just feel like, especially from documentary, that you're just trying to keep up with what the subject is throwing at you constantly, because there's so much more to these people's lives than what's in 10 minutes. Like, you would be ignorant to think that you can portray anybody's life in 10 minutes. You know what I mean? And so there's so much to distill down, and this just makes you want to understand and know more. Yeah, totally. It definitely does. It definitely accomplished that. And you guys did a really killer job with it. I loved it. And Quibi comes out it's April 6th. Yep. So if this comes out before April 6th and you're listening to it, pre-order. I think you just download the app and that basically does it. Yeah, and that's your pre-order. 90 days free. So then you can watch Prodigy for free. And if you don't want to keep it, you don't have to, and you get to still watch Prodigy. So do that. Definitely do that. Yes. All right, indeed. Lucas, we'll talk again. I'm sure we'll have you on the show again for the next time whenever we do something. But this was really great, man. Appreciate you taking the time as usual. Yeah, man. Great to talk to you. And yeah, let's do it again. All right, dude. All right. See you. So that's it for today. A big thank you to Lucas. As always, you can find more about him, where to connect with him, and about his new series on the page for this podcast, which you can find at filmriot.com/podcast. Find the episode page for this episode. Of course, you can find me online at twitter.com/Ryan_Conley. If you dug this episode and all the other episodes, jump over to iTunes, subscribe, leave a review. All that stuff helps us out a lot. And until next time, don't forget to write, shoot, edit, repeat.